Hello, my friends. Happy Friday. There's been a lot going on this week, and of course, we're going to start with the Xbox news. The acquisition of Activision Blizzard is finally complete. Everybody is running through the halls at Xbox. I'm sure they're banging on pots and pans, very excited that this is finally here. Xbox and Microsoft put together a big trailer showing the kumbaya kind of moment of all of these different brands and all of these companies working together, and it is quite astounding how many different forms of intellectual property exist under one massive umbrella there. This is one of the largest deals that's ever happened in media, let alone the video game industry, and it sure looked like it could go either way for a long time, but the deal has finally concluded. The one thing I definitely will say from my perspective is that as big as this deal is and as monopolistic as it might seem on the outside, what I know of the video game industry is that anytime there are massive swings and changes, whether it's the market kind of chasing a new idea or whatever, and companies rise and fall, what happens is that people leave and new ideas spring up and new companies come up and great games get made out of small little spaces that end up becoming huge, huge concepts. And of course, you can even look back into Activision's own history at the launch of the original Call of Duty, which was a World War II game. Nobody knew it was going to be this massive juggernaut and kind of take over the video game industry and become this sort of big bone of contention between PlayStation and Xbox at the time. And that's what happens again and again. I've seen it in my career. There's just been small ideas that have erupted and become huge and important, valuable franchises in the game industry. And now Microsoft owns a bunch of those franchises, but it's also incumbent on them to create new ones. But of course, what we also want to see, especially with the idea that Game Pass can house all kinds of interesting game ideas, is a lot of our favorite franchises return, maybe with reissues or remasters, but also brand new games. And so I asked everybody with kind of a cheeky message out there with a superimposed Phil Spencer head on the Blackthorn poster, what games they would like to see from Activision Blizzard back under the Xbox umbrella and possibly on Game Pass. And I got some great responses. Brian Lemoyne says MDK 1 and 2, and MDK is a name I have not heard in many years. Celtic Bat says, I doubt it would happen, but there were some very cool Star Trek Activision games from the early 2000s era. Elite Force, Armada, Bridge Commander. I'd totally play those as Xbox ports if they could be properly optimized. Scrappy Grandpappy said, River Raid, the first game I remember playing the crap out of on the Atari. Other than that, give us that Tony Hawk Pro 3+4. They have to bring us new Tony Hawk. Are you kidding me? 1+2 was incredible. I Am an Idiot says, bring back Skylanders, Tony Hawk 3 and 4, and Guitar Hero. Thanks. Well, you're welcome. I can't confirm any of those, but hopefully Xbox is listening. Donald MacArthur says, finish the Sin episodes somehow, some way. Scott A says, Interstate 76, I remember it being pretty fun when it came out. An updated version would be pretty cool. Ariel Slayer says, bring back Blur, and I concur with that one. I think that would be incredible. Blur rocked. Paul Adamson said it would be pretty sweet if they could resurrect StarCraft Ghost. Blair Farrell says, Spider-Man and its sequel from the PlayStation 1, Shattered Dimensions, X-Men Legends 1 and 2, and the High Moon Transformers games. And you see, that's a big deal with these Activision properties. They worked on so many cool licensed games, and it would be really, really incredible if Microsoft flexed its muscles and its partnerships and brought out collections of some of these fantastic Marvel games, the Transformers stuff. It would be so cool, especially if they were on other platforms and they had like the Game Boy Advance Spider-Man game, the Mysterio's Menace, on Game Pass that you could play on Xbox Series X. That would be awesome. And Seymour Gore kind of agreed with my cheeky Blackthorn poster. He says, Blackthorn is my top choice too, but the Lost Vikings are also due for a comeback. Yeah, we need a whole bunch of really cool deep dives into Activision history. I mean, there were some interesting Activision games going back to the Atari 2600 that could be revitalized and reutilized. And I think that would be amazing. But you know what? It's all over social media, and all kinds of veterans in the video game industry have been popping up with opinions as well. Rod Ferguson, who's running Diablo, said, couldn't be more excited about what's to come. This is a real chocolate and peanut butter moment for me, bringing all of my favorites together. It's so nice to be back, because of course he was working on Gears just before he made the move to Diablo. And Jason Rubin, who founded Naughty Dog and is now working at Meta, said, just saying that Crash Bandicoot is now a Microsoft IP. Just saying that. Crazy. Hashtag who would have thunk. Yeah, it's surreal. A lot of these franchises date back decades, not just years, and it's going to be really interesting to see what Microsoft and Xbox do from here, how much stuff starts appearing on Game Pass and how soon that happens. I think we're not going to have to wait that long. I think we're going to see some pretty interesting announcements before the end of the year, which is going to be crazy. But these folks have been working on this for a long time. One other piece of news that came out of this is that Bobby Kotick is going to be leaving Activision at the end of the year. And one wonders if Bobby Kotick and John Riccitiello will be working on something in 2024. But you know what? I want to hear from you guys. What are you excited about with this deal? Or are you excited? Are you down on it? Are you happy that it's finally not going to be a news item that we're going to be talking about all over the place? Activision and Blizzard are now owned by Microsoft and Xbox. Wow. Now let's switch over to PlayStation news and stuff that happened this week. And of course, the big news is that the PS5 Slim is a reality. It's not just an internet rumor any longer. It's coming out next month, and there's a bit of a price bump on the digital version of the console because there's two different editions. There's a digital one, and there's a PS5 Slim model with the optical drive, which is removable. So in effect, both versions of the PS5 Slim can have the detachable optical drive, so you can pop in Blu-ray discs and 4K discs and watch movies if you want to, or buy physical games and play the games on both of these devices. They've had a bump up in terms of storage, so it's now 1 terabyte of hard drive space, an actual 1 terabyte of hard drive space. And there is also a price bump up on the digital edition. It's going to cost you a little bit more than the current digital PS5 model is. They weigh a little bit less, they are a little bit smaller. They don't look all that much smaller from the videos and the photos, but they are a little bit smaller. And of course, they have a different kind of look to them as well. They have this kind of split on the side panels, which is different from the current existing PS5 models. So it's going to be interesting to see if there will be customizable panels, and maybe they'll do a Spider-Man one. I'm very happy with my Spider-Man 2 model of the existing PlayStation 5, so I don't see myself leaping over to the Slim, but it is interesting that they're making the optical drive optional, and it points to something else that's in the news right now. Best Buy has talked about leaving physical media behind at the end of 2024, and of course that has rippled through the online community because that means that retailers are definitely thinking about whether it makes sense to stock all kinds of discs, whether they're movies or game discs or other physical media. And this move from Sony to kind of make optical discs an option is a pretty dramatic one. You know, there are a lot of statements out there that suggest that we will always be able to buy physical media for video games, but clearly digital is taking a huge market share out there, and companies are reacting to that news. Does seem a little bit weird, though, if you have a physical storefront location, why you wouldn't want to offer physical goods. What do you guys think? Do you think Best Buy is crazy to leave physical media behind? Let me know in the comments below. And the other thing that Sony has been talking about recently is the Access controller. They put a whole video together, which is the story of how the Access controller came to be and how it's meant to be accessible for any type of player out there. Highly commendable. The device looks really freaking cool as well. You can pre-order it now. It comes out in December, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what people think of playing with this new controller. Over on my Nintendo Switch, I have been playing Detective Pikachu Returns, which is a sequel to the 3DS Detective Pikachu game. I streamed a whole bunch of this on Twitch the other day, and I think the chat and I had a pretty good time with it. It's definitely slow going, and it's definitely engineered for younger players out there. It's very cutesy. It's got a cool kind of cartoony look to it, but there's also a little bit of a maturity to the character designs. It's not especially mind-blowing or impressive visually, but I did like the aesthetics. I did like the design choices. And there are some really nice cutaway shots of all of these different Pokemon creations. And what you do, it's carrying on from the story of the first game. You play as a young detective named Tim, and you are buddied up with a talking Pikachu detective played by Will Arnett, which is crazy. And the two of you are off trying to figure out these kind of low-impact crimes that are happening in Rhyme City. And it's a game about walking over and talking to all kinds of different people and trying to pick up clues from them. You're also looking around in the environment. It's very hand-holdy, so it really is kind of guiding you along, and it tells you when you can begin deducing, and you start to figure out and put the details together so that you can zero in on your suspects and then eventually solve the crimes that you get called in to help on by the local authorities, which is pretty cute. But there is this overarching story which connects it to the events of the first Detective Pikachu game from the 3DS about Tim's missing father, Harry. And so there are some interesting story beats and connections that keep you in on what's happening, but the gameplay just feels very safe and tailored for a much younger crowd. I mean, this is a game for, like, I'd say younger kids, like 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds. My daughter's 11 now, so I think she would find this pretty juvenile and she wouldn't get into this too much, even though she is a big fan of Pokemon. But if you are a huge fan of Pokemon, it is an interesting game to pick up because of the different types of interactions that you get. For the most part, you're playing as Tim and figuring things out that way and having the conversations with the humans, but Pikachu can chat with all of these different Pokemon characters, and sometimes you play as Pikachu and you can employ Pokemon buddies to help in solving some of these crimes. I have to admit that I was finding it a little tedious and a little dull, and I absolutely thought that the production on this should have been enhanced. I mean, Pokemon is such a huge franchise. Real money could have been spent to build this Rhyme City environment into an open world thing. I mean, the idea is amazing. The idea of solving crimes with Pokemon, and you're trying to, deal with the conversations between humans and Pokemon critters and working together to solve all of these different things. I think it could be really, really fascinating, but this is so primitive. It feels almost like an N64 game. It feels like something that could have been made 20 years ago, and that's just too bad. But in spite of all that, there is a charm, and there is this kind of mysterious pull that the game has, and I think if you are a massive Pokemon fan, you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It's definitely a cool idea, and the music is good, and some of the voice acting is fun as well. I just wish it was made with a little bit of a bigger budget and a little bit more ambition, especially in 2023. So it doesn't come with my highest recommendation at all, but Detective Pikachu Returns is all right. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. All right, let's stick with the Nintendo theme for a minute here and talk about the Zelda games that were made for the CDI. And a lot of you are probably scratching your heads right now, but Nintendo and Philips had this strange partnership, and they made some strange Zelda games. And a developer named Seth Fulkerson, who fell in love with these classic Zelda experiences, and he remade them as a fan project. And then he thought, let's make a spiritual successor. And that's exactly what he set out to do with the help of limited run games. It's a title called Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, and I had a chance to speak with Limited Run's Audie Sorley, who you might recognize from Digital Foundry, and Seth Fulkerson about the making of this game for an upcoming episode of Vic's Basement, but here's a little taste. Seth, what is Arzette all about?
Arzette is all about hand-painted backgrounds, classic retro action platformer gameplay, and silly and sometimes cheesy cutscenes.
Audie, why did Limited Run Games want to make this game?
Looking at Seth's incredible understanding of how those originals were made, and then also how to extrapolate all that quality and make something new out of it, was really enticing and exciting for us. So yeah, there was just no way we couldn't be involved, because this is the kind of dream game for us who have loved the CDI all our lives.
What did people not see that you saw in those original Zelda games?
Well, that the gameplay loop is quite solid. It's a very much a prototypical sort of Monster World-esque gameplay loop that is very appealing if you take it away from the hardware that impedes it.
I'll have my full interview with Audie and Seth up very soon, so keep your eyes and ears out for that. But let's move on. It's almost Halloween, it is the witching hour, and Netflix invited me out to see a theatrical screening of the first 2 episodes of The Fall of the House of Usher, which is a new miniseries on the platform, and it's created and run by Mike Flanagan, who's had a lot of success with horror. He did The Haunting of Hill House, and he did Midnight Mass, and also Doctor Sleep. And this show is kind of topical because it's about this super powerful pharmaceutical company headed up by Bruce Greenwood, who is filled with all kinds of really caustic, awful people. And this father figure, played by Greenwood, starts to kind of recognize some of the calamities and the evil elements that are happening around his family. His children start dying. It's based on some Edgar Allan Poe work, which I have to admit I've never read, but it's very creepy. It's very well crafted. It was shot in Vancouver, so there's lots of scenery in the show that's very familiar to me, which was kind of cool to see it in a theater in Vancouver. And I just was really captivated by the over-the-top performances. All of the characters are just so blisteringly awful. Like, you just want to see harm come to most of them. And they're all incredibly wealthy. They've made their money selling drugs that have been very harmful to humanity. And there's a bit of a comeuppance that's happening. And you're going to start to see, as this miniseries goes on, how these characters kind of get what's coming to them, you know? And we see a little bit of that in the first 2 episodes, and we also see Bruce Greenwood and his character kind of coming to terms with this is an inevitability in his life. He's always been surrounded by tragedy. And we do get a little bit of backstory and some flashbacks in here, and some of it's hard to watch, and some of it is just so grating in terms of like how awful these people are, but you can't take your eyes off the screen. It's so well crafted and everybody is fully committed. Carla Gugino, who we've seen in tons of things, including both Spin City and Sin City, is terrific in this. She's got this character, this very mysterious character who's flitting in and out of the lives of these different people. She's spooky and ethereal, and this whole show has just got this great creep to it. Now, I've only seen the first couple episodes, so I'm not going to review the entire thing, but I recommend it, and I think that if you're trying to get into the Halloween spirit, you can't find a much better TV show than this one right here. The Fall of the House of Usher is very special and very creepy. And I know that Halloween is still just approaching, but I got a trailer for a Christmas game today. It's The Grinch Christmas Adventures. It's from Outright Games, who specializes in family-friendly games. And the game doesn't look like it's groundbreaking or super amazing, but it does look cute, and it does look like it's captured some of that Seussian magic. It's out for all of the platforms right now, so if you're looking to get into the holiday spirit, you might want to take a look at this one. I don't know if I'm going to have time to review this title, but this one definitely intrigued me, and there's so many freaking games out there right now, so I wanted to share the news that this was out there with you guys. Now, Apple and Paramount Pictures have teamed up with Martin Scorsese to bring Killers of the Flower Moon to the big screen, and it will also be on Apple TV Plus down the road. I got a chance to see an early screening of this movie. It comes out next week as I'm recording this, and man, it is something else. It is a beautiful picture from Scorsese for sure, illustrating a part of American history that I wasn't familiar with, and much like the Tulsa massacres that were illustrated in that Watchmen TV series on HBO, there is this element of, like, of course we should know what went down in Osage County. This is the story of the murders that happened in Osage County in Oklahoma in the 1920s, where the residents, the indigenous people, had struck black gold. They had found oil on their land and become incredibly wealthy and had started to take over the towns in the area and had suddenly flipped the whole racial paradigm on its head. And the way that we're taken into this story is through Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Ernest Burkhart, who finds it all strange and fascinating. He goes to visit his uncle, who has become this kind of legendary father figure to all kinds of people. He's friends to everybody in this community, and he starts to get integrated into this new, interesting dynamic that he hasn't seen anywhere else in the world. And what we start to see is that there's this insidious power grab that's happening, and all kinds of nightmare things start happening to the indigenous people. There are murders happening all over the place, and people getting sick, and it's just all mysterious, and nothing is getting done about all of these heinous crimes that keep getting committed in this community. And so we follow along on this path, and it becomes incredibly stressful, and you're very concerned about these individuals. There's this encroaching dread that's happening through the course of the story and the course of the film, but it's also beautifully rendered and captured, and there's just imagery and you know, color and sounds and things that we just don't see placed together, and it's just a wholly unique experience. And yes, there's threads and connections to some of the crime stories that Scorsese is famous for, and it's not just because Robert De Niro, his muse, plays the uncle figure here, and he's very good, although it's hard to forget that it's Robert De Niro in this piece. And it almost would have been, I think, cooler for Scorsese to find another actor, maybe an unknown actor, like he has with some of the indigenous people, like Lily Gladstone, who plays Molly Burkhart, who is at the center of this thing. But the whole integration into this society and into these cultures is so fascinating to observe on screen. It's not a comfortable one. It's not one where it's peace and love by everybody by any means, but everybody has to kind of live together, and you see the friction and you see the turmoil and you see the tension, and I found it so refreshing and so well crafted. It's definitely a lengthy picture. It could have been split up into a miniseries for sure, but I wasn't bored. I was fascinated and riveted, and all of it is based on true events, which is incredible and not honestly that hard to believe about some of the American history that we keep finding out about. But it's all made with such a deft touch. Clearly, Scorsese wanted to honor the source material, which is this celebrated book, and turn that into something that really honors the source material, but also honors this history, this complicated history. And again, DiCaprio proves himself to be one of the best actors that American cinema has ever had. He's just so convincing in the role. He's so snaky and greasy and believable and shocking in terms of the choices and the ignorance and the malevolence that the character is capable of. And there's also this empathetic quality about everybody and their inability to kind of figure out how to peaceably coexist, and how betrayed the Osage Nation is by people that they should be looking to as allies. And of course, some of the story is just hard to stomach, but it is an important story, and it's beautifully told, masterfully told. It's absolutely worth seeing on the big screen as well. It's gorgeous, and the music is incredible as well. Robbie Robertson worked on the score, and there's just this beautiful authenticity and I think a real commitment from Scorsese and his crew to kind of live with this story, and you feel it. You feel transported to the era, and you feel just moved by the quality of this experience, for sure. It's a movie that will haunt me forever, and I'll think about it, and I'll think about these characters and their choices and what became of the Osage Nation during that time forever. I'm going to give Killers of the Flower Moon a 9 out of 10. So there you go. That's your rundown for today. Make sure you don't miss out on Killers of the Flower Moon. Incredible movie. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll be back soon with some streams on twitch.tv/EPN and some new reviews and some new news and some new interviews right here on YouTube. Thanks for your support. We'll see you soon. And until then, play forever.